Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dan, and I am back with another set of power rankings, this time for the GLDL Season 2 Frogadier division. And I am joined by another coach in the division, Lewis. In Discord, he's Thunderball, and he is the coach of the HK Blades. Is that right, Lewis?
That is correct. Hello, everyone. I'm Lewis, and yeah, I'm very excited to start this power ranking.
Fantastic. So let me just break us down a little bit on the methodology that we used. So we both used this same methodology, and then we averaged our rankings, and this video is going to be the aggregate sum of our rankings. But basically, coach and playstyle are not taken into consideration. And if 100 equally skilled players were given each team and then asked to play every matchup against each other in a massive round robin, this is the final standings that we would have expected from these matchups. And a higher ranking doesn't necessarily mean that we believe that that team would be favored over a lower rated one. For example, the number 2 team could have a 60% favorite win rate over number 1, but against the rest of the field, number 1 could have a better win rate than number 2, justifying the overall position. Do you have any thoughts on the methodology or potential difficulties of ranking these teams before we dive into the teams?
I think the methodology is great. We did have quite a bit of trouble ranking all these teams because we had a quadruple tie between four different teams at a point. So, yeah, we had to deal with that, and it really caused a lot of trouble, but it was great, and we had a lot of fun doing it, and really shows that everyone in this division drafted really well.
Yeah, I can absolutely agree with that. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and move on to the first team. So, for our number 12 spot in the power rankings, we have the Cut Sceptiles. I will say, first of all, this isn't necessarily fair to them because they are a replacement coach. We had one coach who had to drop due to some IRL things that happened, but his team was able to be replaced by the Cut Sceptiles, Tomb, who was a Season 1 coach, who is graciously filling in Season 2, who got to make some edits to the team, but he only had access to Pokemon that had not been drafted or that were on the previous team, so it wasn't necessarily the easiest transition for him. But being objective as we can, I have this team as number 12 in the current power rankings for the division. The team is Urshifu Single Strike, Togetic, Regigigas, Weezing, Riolu, Golduck, Dedenne, Tornadus Eye, Venusaur, Phalanx, and Vulpix. So, looking at the good of this team first, we have absolutely the Venusaur Vulpix. Vulpix isn't the best, but Venusaur under Sun is always going to be a threat. Even in non-max, it's going to be fast Sleep Powder, and it's also going to have a decent damage output as well, even though it's probably better in a max format. Then you've got potentially the best speed control in the format in Tornadus, and a top 5 Pokemon in that Urshifu Single Strike, and a good redirector in the Togetic. Now, this team is better than a lot of the other number 12 ranked teams that I've seen. But there are some issues that I have with it. GLDL Frogadier is a non-max division, and I am not a huge believer of Regigigas in non-max. Gigas Weezing in max, where you can start striking and reducing your opponent's speed and trying to steamroll from there, like that, I think is really good. But without max, you're having to rely on weaker attacks out of the Regigigas without the speed control aspect. And I really think that that is a weak point on this team. I also think that the Golduck is a little out of place. It's either Swift Swim or some weather control, but if you're playing this team the way that it looks like it wants to play a lot of the time, your best way to set rain is going to be with Tornadus, and that's a bit of a 4-move slot syndrome on the Tornadus, or you're going to want to have your own Venusaur Weather potentially, and then Golduck it has sort of counter synergy there. And then Riolu, again, is another Pokemon that's probably a bit better in max than non-max. So overall, I think the team is solid and really good for a last-ranked team, but I just think there are a few things on this team that leave room to be desired. Specifically, I think that Gigas Weezing is going to end up being 2 transactions because I don't think it's going to be fantastic in the format. But what do you think, Lewis?
I absolutely agree with everything you just said. Another thing I want to point out with Riolu is that his team doesn't really have that many physical attackers. Like you got Urshifu single strike and Phalanx, I guess. But like other than that, I don't see like coaching Riolu doing too much, since Riolu doesn't actually have any speed control as a Prankstermon, and there's no way you're pairing Riolu with Regigigas, because slow start just means that you're basically, like, even with coaching boost, you're not doing that much.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. The coaching boosts are really just for the Urshifu or maybe the Phalanx as well, but I can see Riolu having less use on this team than in a lot of other teams. But moving on, why don't we talk about our rank 11 team, and I'll let you break this one down. We have the Poke Kickers.
So the Poke Kickers have Tapu Koko, Corviknight, Salazzle, Alolan Raichu, Zoroark, Sock, Ninja, Lapras, Furion, Blastoise, Lapras, and Lantern. So as you can see that they have 3 electric types and 3 water types. So water types aren't the worst to double up on, but the electric types, all 3 of the electric types are weak to ground types, because they don't have something like, let's say, a Zapdos or like a Rotom Fan, or like basically electric that isn't weak to ground type, which makes it so that they have quite a big ground weakness. Like they do have Corviknight and I guess Shedinja and Landorus, but like that really isn't enough, and like a well-placed ground move can like decimate this team very badly. Another thing that this team struggles in is their Trick Room. Have a Trick Room setter, and more so they don't even have a Trick Room abuser, which means that they're probably only going to go fast mode, and if you run Trick Room mode against this team, they are going to have a hard time dealing with it.
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that. Like, the fast mode on this team obviously has some potential, because you've got the Sock again with Inner Focus Coaching next to a potential Tapu Koko that can have a physical set, or next to a Landorus Therian that can launch some Earthquakes, but you've got to be worried about the Earthquakes on your own side. Corviknight, you can always, do body press shenanigans with that Corviknight. Salazzle's going to have Fake Out, Encore, and a couple other interesting support moves, and the Raichu is going to be pretty fast as well. But I agree, the ground weakness is pretty pronounced on this team, and beyond that, if you look at the way that it's set up, a lot of the attackers aren't that bulky. Like, the bulk on this team is almost all in the Corviknight and the Landorus. And other than that, and the Blastoise, I guess, but other than that, it's not a super bulky team in terms of what you're going to be rolling out on a game-to-game basis, and that makes me a little nervous, given how free Earthquake looks into a lot of this team. But again, I think this is a really solid team for rank 11. But moving on, we've got our rank 10 team, the Raleigh Rapidash. So, the Rapidash, they have their namesake, obviously, the Rapidash, but more importantly, they have Indeedee F, Rotom Fan, Arctozolt, Hawlucha, Abomasnow, Ninjask, Volcarona, Ditto, Skarmory, and Umbreon. This team's weird. I really like parts of it, and I really don't like other parts of it. Let's start with what I like. Indeedee F, I think, is a top 5 Pokemon in the format. The Arctozolt and Abomasnow will work very well together with the Indeedee. Hail plus Indeedee is something that I have experience with, and it does go very well together. Rotom is a very, very solid complement to a lot of this team, with the grass weakness for Rotom being pretty well countered by that Hail mode. And then I think Umbreon is another really solid support piece. Super bulky, can use Moonlight, slowly grind things down while maintaining its health. And then I think Volcarona is pretty underrated because of the flexibility. You've got the Rage Powder, and then you've got the setup potential as well. But then there are just a few things on this team that don't make sense. The Hawlucha is fine, because obviously it's an unburdened attacker with the Indeedee, but the Rapidash, Skarmory, Ninjask, and Ditto, they just feel like slots that aren't going to be super useful on a week-to-week basis, and that makes me a little nervous about this team. Like, yes, they will find use, but in draft, my general rule is even if you're looking at low tier things, you want to make sure that you're not taking anything that looks like it just gets outclassed by other things. You want to find things that do their job better than other things can do their job. And I don't think any of these Pokemon do that, except for maybe the Ditto, and even then, without restricteds, I think Ditto's not quite as strong. But what do you think about the Rapidash?
I agree with what you said. Another problem that I want to point out is that their only Trick Room center is Rapidash, and Rapidash has quite a high base speed stat, which is that they don't really cope that well with Trick Room. Like, they can maybe stop it using Rapidash, but I'm not too sure about that. Another thing to go off on of what Dan just said about outclassing and whatnot, they already have Volcarona, so I don't see the need for Ninjas, since Ninjas is, yeah, it's faster, but it's basically a physical Volcarona, but worse. So I don't really see the need to do that. Same with Hawlucha and Skarmory, where Skarmory is basically just Hawlucha, but worse.
So
Very
much worse. What was that?
This obviously still very good paired with Indeedee.
Yeah, I can agree with that as well. But moving on to this next team, this one's pretty interesting. Why don't you give us a breakdown of the Minnesota Milotic?
So the Minnesota Milotic has Regieleki, Conkeldurr, Magmortar, Oranguru, Flygon, Cryogonal, Mawile, Dracovish, Crustle, Ship, and Dusclops. So they have Eleki plus Dracovish, which means that Eleki can go for Electro Webs and have some good speed control and lower the opponent's speed, so that Dracovish can easily go for double-powered Vicious Rends. And they actually have a very good Trick Room core, in my opinion, with like Oranguru or Dusclops as a setter, and that Dusclops is quite a good Trick Room setter. Like, it can set up Trick Room quite reliably. And Conkeldurr is a pretty good Trick Room abuser. One thing one thing I see lacking in this team is a Tailwind user, and if they could maybe get a Sandstream user for the Dracovish, so that Dracovish has like multiple modes it can use, it can go off of, it would be even better. But yeah, overall, this is actually a very good team. Like, although it's number 9 in the power rankings, it's still an incredible team. A lot better than a lot of number 9s I've seen before.
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that, and I think your points are pretty well taken here. Like, obviously, the Trick Room mode is pretty fleshed out on this team, with Oranguru, Dusclops, and Conkeldurr being a really solid Trick Room mode, and then the fast mode is also solid. But I think where we're starting to get a little nitpicky with this team is the best speed control from the fast mode is the Electro Up from Regieleki, which doesn't affect every Pokemon. And Regieleki can do other things as well, but if that's your only form of speed control, you don't really have that Unburden Mon, you don't have that Weather Abuse, and you don't have that Tailwind. If you can find something that neutralizes the Regieleki, then you're neutralizing the fast mode, and then you really only need to focus on the slow mode. So that's probably a little nitpicky with this team. Overall, it's obviously a very solid team, and I think it's going to be very fun to watch this season to see how exactly the coach is going to leverage that Regieleki throughout the season. But let's check out the next team, which is going to be the Immortals Incineration. So this team's cool. It's got Tapu Fini, Rotom Heat, Lucario, Drampa, Sceptile, Frostmoth, Carbink, Braviary, Sylveon, Torracat, and Fletchinder. So let's start with the pros here. Speed control, the fast speed control is going to be very good, and then Carbink is actually a pretty underrated setter in the format as well for Trick Room. So it's going to have fast and slow option, and it's going to have really fast options as well. It can have priority Tailwind with the Fletchinder if it wants, or it can have bulkier Tailwind with either the Braviary or the Frostmoth. It's got Unburdened Sceptile next to Tapu Lele, but Sceptile might be the worst Unburdened abuser, because, yes, you can make it the fastest thing in the format with Unburden, right? But then what? It doesn't really leverage that as well as a lot of other Unburdened support Pokemon can do, or Unburdened offensive Pokemon. And then offensively, you've got Drampa, Lucario, Rotom, Heat, Sylveon, and Tapu Fini as the main offensive options right away, and I guess Braviary to some extent. And for me, the biggest issue with this team is the lack of initial offensive presence. Like, yes, it's really bulky, it's really switchable, it's got good speed control options, but if this team gets the speed advantage, it doesn't have that sort of runaway potential with the game of a lot of other teams that get speed advantage. Because if a team gets speed advantage and it has like a base 135 attacker that's usually a little frail, maybe a little slow, so it's tough to use, think something like Haxorus, then that team gets the speed advantage, Haxorus can start picking up KOs. This team gets the speed advantage. Drampa to some extent can start picking up KOs, but Sceptile's not going to be grabbing those KOs. Rotom Heat isn't going to be grabbing all that many KOs. It will get some, as long as you don't need to consistently use the Fire-type move. And then Fini's offenses leave a lot to be desired. So that's my biggest critique of this team, is the lack of initial offensive presence, even though it is a really good combination of types. It's pretty synergistic. It's going to have the ability to get speed control in multiple ways. That's my biggest issue with this team. But what are your thoughts on the team?
I agree with what you said. But one other thing I want to point out, it's also kind of nitpicky, but this team is quite weak to rock types. You got Rotom Heat, Torracat, Braviary, Fletchinder, and Frostmoth. Like, basically half of the team is weak to rock types, and your only rock resist, assuming that I'm not mistaking anything here, is Lucario. And yes, Lucario can threaten rock types, so Rock Slide is such a highly distributed move, where if your team is extremely weak to rock types, it starts to become a bit of a problem, because yes, you do have Fini, you do have, I guess, Lucario and Sceptile to potentially deal with those, like, stab Rock Slide users, but if they use something with, like, a high damage output mod that isn't a rock type, your team will start to suffer a bit of a problem, and yeah, that's going to be an issue for them.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that point. That is something that he needs to be paying a lot of attention to with this team. But let's move on to the number 7 team. Why don't you give us a breakdown of Gumi and the Rolled Gold Pretzels?
Gumi is a great coach. I've heard great things from him, but yeah. The Rolled Gold Pretzels have Entei, Latios, Bisharp, Togedemaru, Tugnul, Druddigon, Sudowoodo, Gyarados, Tapu Bulu, Alolan Exeggutor, and Cursula. So, Entei spam is great. Entei spam is just like, it's undoubtedly amazing in non-max formats. And with like, I guess Beast and Tailwind and Latios, although it is only 110 speed, it's still pretty good. Like, 10 isn't the slowest thing. Yeah, it's you have like Intimidate, Repel with Bisharp, so that they can't like try and intimidate your physical attackers, which this team has quite a lot of them. And it has Inner Focus, so that also is immune to Intimidate. You got like good Fake Out, you got like speed control in both Trick Room and Tailwind from the Exeggutor and the Latios. But my main critique for this team is that it's quite heavy on the Dragon types, which I think he did it on purpose, but I'm not sure. So yeah, you have Latios, you have Alolan Exeggutor, and you have Druddigon. So three Dragon types aren't really the best thing. Dragon isn't the type you want to double up the most. So basically, about it, that's probably about it I want to say for this team. What about you?
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of those points. Latios as a Tailwind setter, I don't love as a primary Tailwind setter, and I bet he doesn't go for Tailwind too much with it because it is something you want to be using a lot more offensively with the base 110 speed instead of the base 130 speed. I think overall the team is pretty well put together with obvious synergies, but my main critique of Gumi's team is the types. I know Gumi is a big type chart person, and the type charts here just seem a little suspect to me. If you're doubling up on grass type, I think he's doubling up on steel as well. He's doubling up or tripling up on dragon, actually. Like, there's just a lot of type repetition that leads to some common weaknesses that make me believe in this team a little less. And I'm personally not a huge fan of the Alolan Executor either. Like, I understand what it's doing on this team, but I think I would have rather seen almost any other Trick Room setter in that slot, because I just don't think it's very good in terms of bulk versus output versus speed tier for a Trick Room setter. But yeah, it's obvious that a Entei, Latios, Bisharp core is going to be really, really threatening, and Gumi's going to pick up a lot of wins this season. He is obviously the defending champion of the Superior Division, so this is going to be a team that's successful this season, but I also know this is the team that we had a lot of disagreement on in terms of placement, but we're going to be getting into a lot of those pretty soon, including this next team, the Ohio Oshawotts. So the Oshawotts have Whimsicott, Indeedee M, and Landorus and Xurkitree. So I'm just starting with those, and I guess we can include Kingler in there. This fast mode is really, really fast and really, really good because it's got the fastest Prankster Tailwind in the game with the Whimsicott, and then it's also got the Indeedee, Landorus, Xurkitree, and Kingler, which are all Pokemon that really can take advantage of that Tailwind, do a lot of damage. Now, where I've got some issues with this team is what does he build to complement that pretty good offensive core. The Mr. Mime Galar is fine. The Cobalion, I understand that it can do beat-up stuff, but that's a lot better in max than in non-max. And then Rapidash, Octillery, and Garbodor, and the Spiritomb. So looking at these, my main issue is that this team is really soft to Trick Room. This is actually the first of 4 teams in a row that we had ended up tied when we were looking at our overall rankings, and we put this team in 4th out of those 4 teams with the tiebreaker because it is just very, very soft to Trick Room. Like, yes, Spiritomb can have some anti-Trick Room abilities, but nothing on this team can set the Trick Room except for the Mr. Mime, and even then, there's nothing on this team that's slow enough to fight effectively in Trick Room either. Like, a good Trick Room mode is going to underspeed this whole team and just give it a lot of problems. So while it's got maybe the most in the league offensive potential for a Tailwind mode, it's also one of the softest teams in the league for a Trick Room mode, which is why we've got it as sort of a middle ranking, because it has the best of one world and the worst of the other. But what are your thoughts on the Oshawotts?
Agree that they have a great offensive mode with like Whimsicott and Landorus and Xurkitree, but I don't really think Kingler fits on this team. First of all, you're doubling on water types, which isn't the worst thing. Water types are probably one of the types if you want to double up on, but I think that even if you want to double on water types, you don't pick Kingler because Kingler's main damage output. One of its main damage output is its Sheer Force set, which Landorus also wants Sheer Force. I don't see him running Sand Force Landorus anytime, so you're competing for the Life Orb slot, which you're always giving it to Landorus. So I don't see the need for Kingler here. You could replace it for like maybe an other type or like a better Trick Room abuser. But overall, this team is very good, especially in the Tailwind offense, and that's about to say.
Yeah, I can agree with that. There is a world where Hypercutter Kingler comes that looks pretty good as well, but I agree that there is going to be some Life Orb pressure generally on this team, because even Indeedee M is going to want it a lot of the time as well, depending on the set, and Xurkitree too to some extent. But why don't you take the next team, which is my team, the Alexandria Arcanines?
Dan's team has Tyranitar, Galarian Zapdos, Azelf, Musharna, Claw, Coin, Glalie, Aegislash, Dracozolt, Togepi, and Lurantis. So, firstly, you can see that there's a very powerful Sand mode in Tyranitar and Dracozolt, where both mobs are actually threats in their own right, where Tyranitar can just dish up heavy damage and I guess even a Dragon Dance set, and Dracozolt is just spamming Volbeak and does a butt ton of damage. Galarian Zapdos is also very good since his team has very powerful physical attackers in like the two Sand mode bonds, and physical defense will benefit him a lot. He also has a very good Trick Room mode in Musharna as a very good setter. Clawitzer and Lurantis and then Aegislash is are quite good Trick Room users, I'd say, and he does have a very good pick, like a very good tier 5 steal in Togepi, where Togepi is just like a redirector with maybe Focus Sash and can take like 2 hits. Purloin is a great prankster mon, very like underrated, usually in the low tier, which provides very good speed control, even though he does lack Tailwind. But yeah, and this team is like onto the bad points is that he's pretty weak to fairy types. You got like Tyranitar, Zapdos, Dracozolt, and Purloin, which Purloin really doesn't count because it's like paper thin. But yeah, his team is quite weak to fairy types. Only resist he has is Aegislash, but that's not really that big of a problem since Aegislash, well, in its blade form, can dish out a lot of damage and possibly deal with most fairy types that he's going to face. So yeah, big team. What do you think?
Yeah, this is not my normal style team. I just wanted to draft a lot of Pokemon that looked fun to play with, not necessarily go for building the best team optimally. Like, I drafted Zapdos G first because I knew Gumi wanted it and I wanted to mess with him, so that's why that's on the team, and then I just sort of built from there. But yeah, it's a pretty fun team. It's got some pieces that I know are strong. Like, I know the Musharma, the Clawitzer, and the Purloin are really strong pieces. I've used them before. Azelf I've used as well, but it's been more of a max threat for me. I'm excited to see what it does in non-max formats. And then I'm really, really stoked about using this Sand mode. Sand is something that I've wanted to try and draft for a long time, and now I finally have the opportunity to do it. So while it's probably not the best team on paper, it's a team that's really going to allow me to play to my strengths and move forward with it. The one thing that I think it's obviously missing is some form of Tailwind, but instead I went for Weather and Prankster Thunderwave as a form of fast speed control. But moving on, we've got the HK Blades, which is your team, and I will take this breakdown. So we've got the Incineroar, the Tangrowth, the Silvally, Arctivish, Aurorus, Galvantula, Doublade, Crobat, Nidoking, Gardevoir, and Throh. So let's start with the really good parts at first, right? So you've got the Tangrowth, which is going to be a fantastic support option redirector that also can do some offensive stuff. You've got Crobat, Nidoking, which is an awesome lead by itself because Tailwind and then Nidoking's going to do a lot of damage. I've got some experience with those two together that I know that they're going to be solid. Incineroar, you've got a great pivot that can also flex into some offensive options, and then you've also got a Hail mode, which I know Arctivish can dish out a lot of damage, even if Aurorus is pretty weak by itself. So overall, I think that there's a lot to really like about this team, but there are a couple things I have questions about. One is probably the Silvally. I've drafted Silvally 3 times, tried to make it work 3 times, and just been slightly underwhelmed all 3 times. The ability to change types is obviously awesome, but when you do that, you don't get an item, and Silvally really wants the item a lot of the time. And if it could have an item along with being any type, it would be really good value in that tier, but as it is, I've just slowly started believing in it less and less every time I've drafted it, thinking that I'm getting insane value. But other than that, this team is a little bit Trick Room soft. Like, yes, you have the Gardevoir and the Throw and the Doughblade, but I think you're not actually bringing them that often. I think you're going to be focusing on that Crobat mode more than anything. You could potentially bring your Trick Room to a game or two, but I don't think it's going to work super effectively as an anti-Trick Room mode because you're going to be wanting that Incin, Crobat, Nidoking, and Hail. I'd say in about at least 80% of your games, you're going to want most of those Pokemon. So I think it's a pretty solid team overall with a lot of respectable modes. There's just a couple things that make me nervous about it. But what are your thoughts on the team?
With my Trick Room mode being not that great, I could have drafted smarter and taken something like Musharna or Aromatisse instead of Gardevoir, but I didn't take my Trick Room setter early enough, and both of them were taken. So that was a bad part in the drafting process by me. But yeah, Volley, I saw it in Tier 3, and I was like a bit interested in it, and I want to see how it goes. Because so Volley, like, even though that very well, not unfortunate experiences with it, I never used Volley before, and I see some potential with it. So yeah, that's basically it. But I do not have as much experience as Dan does, so maybe it will backfire on me. But we'll see.
Yeah, I'll put it like this. It absolutely looks awesome on paper, and there are going to be some matchups in testing where you're like, this thing's going to be awesome. And then when you're testing with it, you're going to be like, I just wish I could put Life Orb on this thing, or I just wish I could put a Resist Berry on this thing. And I don't know, it didn't work for me much when I brought it, but I'm not saying it can't work for anyone else. It just leaves a slightly sour taste in my mouth in raiding teams with it. But let's move on to the next team, and we have Handsome Forest. I'll let you take it first, and then I'll break it down. This is probably the team we had the biggest disagreement on. So why don't you give me the breakdown here first?
One extra about the Handsome Forest is that this was the last team of our quadruple tie, and we placed it at in the first place of that tie. So this team has Rillaboom, Comfey, Weevil, Hitmonlee, Turtonator, Berserk, Vespiquen, Zapdos, Snorlax, Behem, and Quagsire. So a very obvious that you can see right away is Rillaboom paired with unburdened users like Weevil and Hitmonlee. They also have a great Trick Room core in Behem and Snorlax, Turtonator, Berserker, and Quagsire. But one critique I have with this team, like at this point we're being very nitpicky because all the teams are actually very good, is that the unburdened users with only one Grassy Seed. But the reason I got over that is because I guess they could go something like Weakness Policy on either of their unburdened users and proc it with Draenicus from Comfey. But yeah, that's one of the critiques I have for their team. Another thing is that they don't have Tailwind. But I think with Rillaboom, Tailwind is Tailwind should be fine since Rillaboom's priority Grassy Surge does a huge amount of damage. But that's basically all I have for this team. Also Vespiquen.
Yeah, Vespiquen's not the best Pokemon. It's pretty bad. But this team I actually absolutely love. So first off, let's start with Comfey Rillaboom. In grassy terrain, Floral Healing does 2/3 instead of half healing. So you're already able to heal 2/3 of a Pokemon any given turn. Rillaboom plus Unburden user. I don't actually think you need Tailwind with this team because you've got all the priority threats of Rillaboom, plus you've got the fast Unburden user that will be the fastest thing on the field until an opponent sets Tailwind. And then you have the ability to do some late game Trick Room stuff. Berserker is absolutely awesome in the format. Snorlax is a Snorlax, so you know that's going to be good. I'm a little suspicious of this Turtonator. I'm not a huge Turtonator believer, but I understand why it's on the team. But I think the piece that really sold me on this team the more I looked at it is this Zapdos. I think Zapdos looks really good next to Rillaboom as a sort of offensive option with that Rillaboom as well. That gives you a pretty powerful special attacker that can hit a lot of things hard. And if Rillaboom triggers Unburden on Hitmonlee, and Hitmonlee does a fast Rain Dance, and Zapdos comes in with Hurricane and Thunder, it's going to kill everything on the field. So there's just a lot of cool things that this team can do. It's a really synergistic team, and I think it's very powerful as well, even though they probably have less attacking Pokemon than a lot of other teams. I think the support Pokemon really activate the attacking Pokemon well. Like, yeah, I can just Howl with Thievul next to Rillaboom and then just start going for +1 Grassy Glide. That's going to be a lot of damage. So I think it's going to be a very solid team. But moving on, we've got our number 2 team. What was that?
I wanted to add something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to point out that how threatening Snorlax Belly Drum is, because with the increased healing from grassy terrain with floral healing, Snorlax might not even need to run a berry. It can like run something else.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily need to be a healing berry. It could be like a Custap berry, which will just give it priority the next turn or something. But yeah, I think this is a team that's going to be a lot of fun to watch this season, even though I know Haley, the coach, this will be her first ever season playing draft. I think this is a fantastic team for your first ever draft team. But speaking of a more experienced coach, we've got the Greedy Greninjas, who are coached by Sasori. Sasori is a personal rival of mine who I love playing every time we match up. We've had a lot of great matchups in the past, including VBA finals in Season 2. But his team, he's got Rapid Strike Urshifu, Heatran, the Noivern, Gothorita, Wigglytuff, Persian, Lunatone, Sarina, Skuntank, Glastrier, and Piloswine. So let's start with the good. If that Noivern gets Tailwind up, and you get Heatran plus Sarina plus Urshifu under Tailwind, this team's going to deal so much damage. It's going to be a ridiculous amount of damage, and it's going to be incredibly threatening when that happens. And then Gothorita's pretty decent value as a support option. Wigglytuff, you've got that Intimidate deterrence. It's tough to intimidate this team anyway because Urshifu can guarantee crit. And then you've got the Trick Room mode that is actually going to be pretty good, because although Glastrier is not as good without Max, it's still a Glastrier and it still does a lot of damage. So this team, probably in a combination fast and slow, can deal the most damage both ways, but it is defensively pretty suspect. He has a pretty pronounced weakness to ground type Pokemon, and to some extent there are a few other types, but ground is pretty big weakness, with I think the Sarina and the Noivern and the Lunatone being the notable resists to that ground there, whereas everything else is going to take some pretty substantial damage to it. And then Seal, you actually do pretty well against, and those are two that I like checking a lot. But I do think defensively there are some issues with this team, but offensively it's going to be really good and really threatening throughout the season. But what do you think of Sasori's team?
His team, I ranked it pretty high, I think. Yeah, I remember ranking it pretty high in my personal rankings, and it made it up to number 2 the average rankings. So I love his offensive Firewater Grass Core. As Dan had said, once Tailwind is up, they're basically unstoppable. Like, all Firewater Grass Core just does so much damage, like, and not like if like you can somehow stop like one of the specters, like you can either stop physical or special. Like his Firewater Grass Core just has both physical attackers and special attackers, which just makes it even better. But yeah, overall, it's a very good team. I love it a lot, and yeah, that's about it.
All right, and I will let you take the breakdown for our number 1 rated team, the Phoenix Jolts.
Jolts have Celesteela, Suicune, Sneasel, Tauros, Manectric, Toxicroak, Sandslash, Aromatisse, Dragapult, Flareon, and Decidueye. So, first off, Celesteela is a very good mon in draft. You can run it like physically, you can run it specially, you can even run the defensive stuff with leech speed and like substitute and stuff. I am a huge Sneasel believer. I love using Sneasel a lot, whether it's in max or non-max, because like inner focus with like fake out and like, it just does a lot of things. And yeah, I like Suicune is pretty good Tailwind setter, I'd say, since it does have the inner focus ability, and water types are generally very bulky, and Suicune does have the bulk to take a few hits. Aromatisse Trick Room setter, and you can pair with, I guess, Celesteela, because Celesteela isn't the fastest thing ever. Dragapult is insane support and offense, and yeah, about what I want to say about this team. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a very solid team overall. I think Celesteela is slightly better with max, and you can go for those air streams than a non-max, but it's still obviously going to be offensively threatening. Suicune is a fantastic tier 2 Pokemon with some offensive capability, but also unflinchable Tailwind, Snarl support as well. The Sneasel is actually the thing I'm not exactly sure what it's doing. Like, it could trigger a potential weakness policy, but that's less good without max. But I will see what the Sneasel can do and potentially believe it. But where I start really liking this team is stuff like this Tauros. I think the Tauros is really underrated in draft. It can have stuff like Icy Wind, Bulldoze, Body Slam. It can do a lot of cool things and have some speed control options. Dragapult is obviously one of the fastest things in the format, but if this team did have a weakness, which it does, like all draft teams do, it's that while Aromatisse is a great setter of Trick Room, it doesn't actually have a great reason to. Flareon's speed isn't fantastic for Trick Room. Like, there's nothing here that really wants to be in Trick Room all that much. So that's potentially the one weakness of this team, is that Aromatisse can set Trick Room, but with only 99 special attack, it's not a huge Trick Room sweeper. But I do think that this is a very solid choice. I don't think I actually had it rated as my personal #1 team, and I don't think you did either. But on aggregate, it did come out to the highest average rating, because it does have just some very, very solid options just up and down the table, and very well rounded, put together well with types, not obvious weaknesses, and they complement each other well, and that's really all you can ask for in a draft team. But let's move on to these final standings. So we have in 12th place the Cut Sceptiles, then Poke Kickers, Raleigh Rapidash, Minnesota Milotic, Immortals Incineration, Rolled Gold Pretzels, Ohio Oshawotts, Alexandria Arcanines, HK Blades, Handsome Forest, Greedy Greninja, and Phoenix Jolts. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up the video with this final order?
Every team drafted very well. Like, these rankings were very difficult to make. I'm pretty sure I said this at the start, but yeah, I really have to emphasize how amazing everyone drafted, and this is going to be such a fun season to see how everyone does, and yeah, really looking forward.
Yeah, I can agree with that. There was a lot of disagreement on our end on how to rank a lot of these teams, and I think that speaks to how tight a lot of the decision makings were for some teams. I think, in fact, there was a team that I ranked as my #1 team that you had as your number 10 team. And yeah, I think that really just speaks to how really close a lot of these teams were in rating, and how there's just different variants of, like, you valued Tailwind and Trick Room more, and I valued things like Unburdened, Support, and Weather more in our rankings, and that's just more of a stylistic thing looking at the format. But overall, I'm really looking forward to the season. I will be having a couple more GLDL videos coming out, but this is the division that I'm participating in. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.